Benetton B194. What do we know about that car today? Was it really irregular? We try to reconstruct the facts in this episode. Welcome back to our podcast, The Forgotten Formula One. I am your host, Andrea. Just few quick things: subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and share this episode with your Formula One mates. Done? Okay, we're ready to start. 1994 was a watershed year in Formula One history. At first, it seemed to be the year of revolution, with Ayrton Senna's move to Williams and Alain Prost's retirement. A new era in the circus was about to begin, with few expecting that the dividing line would be decidedly sharper and a lot more dramatic. But before we get to Imola, there is one main topic in the technical discussions. While Williams appears to be in clear trouble, far from the glorious performance of the previous years, the dominance of Michael Schumacher's Benetton B194 is undisputed. In the first 3 races, the German dominates far and wide, even raising doubts about the nature of the new car. In the first declarations of Briatore's team, the B194 was simply the evolution of the previous model, with some improvements to try to consistently fight for top positions. Yet from the very first races, it became clear that this new car was aiming for something much bigger, so much it would become the first threat to Williams, the great dominator of previous years. With McLaren far from the top steps of the podium, it suddenly was clear that these two will be the top teams fighting for the World Championship. In any case, Williams may have lost something in terms of the car, but still it gained Ayrton Senna. Before the Imola race, Magic managed to put up 3 pole positions in the first 3 Grand Prix. Williams may not have been the fastest car, but Senna was still the master of qualifying. In the races, however, the story was different. Schumacher dominated, Senna struggled a lot, beset by the woes of a car that clearly was not perfect. He actually fought with the German very few times. The point of this story, the question mark about the Benetton new challenger, Ayrton asked himself after the Brazilian Grand Prix. Let's take a step back. There had been several changes in the regulations since 1993, and those changes were going to have a big impact on the car design. Active suspensions, ABS and traction control all had been banned. In the paddock, the most malicious and insistent rumor was that these changes were an attempt to limit the dominance of Williams, which had built some of the strengths of this car on active suspensions and other driving aids. In addition, for the first time since 1983, refueling during races was reintroduced for the 1994 season. For Williams, this sudden change of direction was not anticipated. They really didn't see that coming. Adrian Newey and his team were already working on an improved version of the FW15C, which now had to be completely revolutionized. This rules change made the FW16 an extremely nervous and unreliable car. The Renault engine was powerful, but you could feel that something wasn't alright. Senna could certainly tell. In fact, he said to a friend, "I haven't had a single run or a single lap where I felt comfortable or completely safe in my new car." In short, new regulations led to a change at the top of the performance ranking of the cars. Williams still was dangerous, but it now appeared much less unbeatable. Benetton stood as the new kid in town. It seemed that in Anston, someone found the recipe for a fast, competitive and reliable car. Despite this, the suspicion that arose is that someone in Benetton had devised some ploy to circumvent the rules and thus gain an advantage over their opponents. This was nothing new. With every change in the rules, everyone looks for grey areas from which they could gain an advantage, but here there seemed to be more. At the first Grand Prix of the season in Brazil, Schumacher was battling with Senna when he came into the pits, and after a very fast stop, he came out and held the lead. An initial suspicion began to arise, namely that Benetton had found a way to make faster pit stops than other rivals. Senna had to retire, throwing his fans into despair. Then, once the race was over and he learned what was going on during Schumacher's stop, the Brazilian ace went furious. He ran to the Benetton motorhome in search of Schumacher, telling him that he would never win like that in front of his people. Well, this is a version of the story. We don't have many sources or evidence about that dialogue, just a few recalls. It may have unfolded differently, but for sure, even if things hadn't gone exactly that way, a suspicion in Senna's mind was certainly born. Ayrton's mind, we know, was a computer. Senna was able to notice things way before others did. His ability to observe and learn was well known to those who worked with him and to his opponents too, and the Brazilian champion began to reason about that matter. Let's go now to Ida Pacific Grand Prix. Senna is forced to retire a few seconds after the start, caught up in the chaos at the start. But after jumping out of the car, the Williams driver, instead of returning to the pits, stood in a marshal's post watching the other cars go by, paying particular attention to his rival's Benetton. The engines of Schumacher's and Jos Verstappen, his teammate, seems to sound different from each other. Senna was convinced himself that there was something different about Schumacher's car. Whether there was or not, I don't know, but Senna was absolutely sure there was. This recalls Ian Harrison, Williams' team manager, exactly 20 years later. We can't say how much truth there was, but Senna's doubts unfortunately never had a follow-up. As you know, the Brazilian champion will tragically die in Imola. But at the same time, the FIA also moved, and after the San Marino Grand Prix, it launched an investigation. Findings were requested on the computer systems of the teams that finished on the podium: McLaren, Ferrari and Benetton. The process was entrusted to Liverpool Data Research, which requested to acquire source codes of the car's software and schematics of the systems. Ferrari was the first one to respond. Why were the Red Team also involved in this story? It all started with something their driver Nicola Larini said after the Pacific Grand Prix. Leaving the track, the Italian driver declared, between the serious and the joking, that he forgot to activate traction control and he retired because of that. The Maranello team, according to the FIA reports, openly cooperated within the required time frame and the test results did not reveal any irregularities. But both Benetton and McLaren were missing from the roll call, providing nothing for 2 months. The Anston-based manufacturer responded to the Federation's solicitation, stating that source codes couldn't be made available for commercial reasons. A demonstration was scheduled at the Cosworth factory, but source codes still were missing. The two teams, who had been unwilling to provide data on time, were fined $100,000 each, raising more suspicions. Back to the track, however, at the French Grand Prix starting third, Schumacher had a great reaction as the lights went out and got ahead of both Williams, already leading the race at the first corner. David Coulthard, 1994 Williams' driver, who was being replaced by Nigel Mansell in that race, was a commentator for the race on TV. He saw the start and suddenly said that Schumacher's perfect start reminded him of the kind of starts in the previous season when traction control was legal, and we all know Michael Schumacher wasn't exactly a master of race starts. 2 races later, suspicions about pit stops returned at Hockenheim. During a pit stop, the fuel gun did not enter the car properly and Verstappen's B194 was engulfed in flames. The Dutchman suffered minor burns, 4 of the Benetton mechanics were also affected, and investigations were immediately launched, leading to this conclusion: the fuel valve was closing slowly due to the presence of something unidentifiable. In addition, they found out that a filter designed by Intertechnic to eliminate any possible fire hazard had been removed. Without that filter, fuel flowed through the car at a speed 12.5% faster than usual, saving about a second in the stop time. The whole thing, of course, ended up in court, where the FIA concluded that Benetton had not attempted to cheat, by removing the filter, but nonetheless acted without permission to try to gain an advantage. But here we are talking about ploys to gain seconds on the track, not about the regularity of the car. For this part of the story, let's go to July 30, 1994, when The Independent published an article about Benetton software. Apparently, during the checks we mentioned earlier, a file called Launch Control had been found. What was Launch Control? It was a system that allowed the driver, Schumacher in this case, to make perfect starts thanks to a special throttle valve bias. The clutch, the gearbox, the engine speed, all of this was fully automatically controlled by the system according to a well-defined pattern. To put that simply, Benetton was trying to do something they couldn't do. The file had been hidden within the computer system. To find it, one had to call up the program software menu, they had to scroll down beyond the bottom line, then they had to select a seemingly empty line, press a secret key, and without anything being shown on the screen, the launch control was ready for action. The famous command number 13 was present in the list, but apparently it was deactivated and placed after number 10, 11 and 12 strings, which were empty. After all of this mess, this sophisticated system was taken over by the driver, who, through a particular sequence of gear shift positions, selected a specific gear. The clutch and throttle pedals also had to be in specific positions. That's so complex that it gives you an hell of an headache just talking about it, but still, no matter how ingenious it was blatantly against the rules. It clearly was a driving aid. Benetton initially tried to defend itself by claiming that this system was only used during testing and that in any case the system could only be activated with a recompilation of the source code. However, this was refuted by the analysis. The launch control could in fact be easily activated through a laptop connected to the gearbox control unit. Their backs to the wall, the Benetton technicians reacted more or less like this. Come on, really? You could do this stuff? Well, actually, look at this! If you plug in a laptop, it works! Who would have thought that? What an unexpected surprise! The FIA then reacted as if it were Little Red Riding Hood in front of the wolf in grandmother's clothing, asking, well, why did you use such a complex system to activate it only in the testing phase? Benetton replied, well, it's so hidden to prevent it from accidentally activating. I swear it's real, they really said that. I can't, well, although the data make think quite a lot, however, the FIA was unable to prove that Benetton actually used launch control in the race, so at the German Grand Prix it issued a statement in which it explained, the most plausible situation is that Benetton didn't use launch control during the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. If there had been evidence, the World Sports Council would have been officially asked to exclude Benetton from the World Championship. Given the available evidence, such a decision would have turned out to be wrong. So, in short, the suspicion was there, but without concrete evidence, and the FIA decided to publish the report, but did not proceed with further checks. So it will forever remain just a suspicion, and only those who worked on the B194 during those years know the truth. Maybe just few of them. For us, it's difficult to prove that the car was illegal. Ross Brawn stated that in 1994 the launch control was never used, but as always, everyone pulls water to his own mill, and we, just watching things from outside, have to rely on sources rather than suspicions if we want to tell a story as objectively as possible. Well, we can say one thing, however, starting with a quote from JJ Leto on this very subject. He said, "Probably something was tried and tested. I don't think Benetton was the only team. I'm sure other teams tried similar things. In those days, hiding electronics was easier than today." Basically, he said, everyone did it, but no one did it. Arguably, several teams had attempted to insert and disguise driving aid devices, and perhaps someone even managed to do so, but clearly the team that wins draws the most attention and suspicion. It goes without saying that it will always be the first one to be accused, while perhaps others who attempted the same thing but with less success escaped it. An underlying question remains. Why did the FIA choose to reveal the exact contents of the report without then taking actual action? Imagine if something like this came out today, with social media and Netflix and all of this stuff. Things would get wild, I'll tell you. Instead, to this day, a series of question marks remain, which probably will never be met. Years later, for example, Jos Verstappen, Benetton's second driver in 1994, recalled, "People think I'm making excuses, but I know Schumacher's car was different from mine. I thought it was impossible to do. I was trying to brake to the limit and take the corners as fast as I could, and so I said to myself, how can Schumacher do that? Something was wrong, there were electronic aids, I was convinced of that. When I later asked the Briatore about it, he said, let's try to not talk about it, so I think I know enough." Of course, relying on the versions of the protagonists is like walking around in a maze. You will never find the right solution. Everyone tries to get you on their side and convince you that they are in the right, especially in Formula 1. Why, for example, would Benetton have given Verstappen a less powerful car than Schumacher's? What should Michael have feared about Jos? I mean, the differences between the two drivers were obvious. One was a future 7 times world champion, the other was a good driver but nothing more. But it's quite obvious that at Anston they tried to play the "it's there but you can see it" card. Just as there is not a little evidence that tells us that such solutions were tried by other teams, perhaps with less success. There's a quote from Ron Dennis that sums it up well, uttered at the beginning of the season. "I don't think you should ban something you can't control." It must also be said that even assuming that the B194 used the launch control, the following year the Anston team changed engines, switching from Ford to the Renault ones. They adapted the design to the post-Imola changes and they continued to dominate. That's a sign that no matter what, the car was fast and the design was more than valid. And so, to answer the question at the beginning, was the Benetton B194 illegal? Maybe yes, as other cars probably were, McLaren, Ferrari to name two. I'll tell you what I think and it's just my opinion. Formula 1 was coming of 2 years, 1992 and 1993, literally dominated by Williams. The rule changes not only were intended to limit the dominance of newest cars, but they also aimed to find a new competitor, a new team that would put a different line in the Roll of Honor. If we want to find a comparison, we can make the same argument for the rules changes between 2004 and 2005, which effectively broke Ferrari's dominance. And if the new team that leaps to the top is not quite alright, in the name of entertainment, the show must go on, and the circus of Formula 1 keeps rolling. This is food for thought. What do you think about the matter? Let us know in the comments and see you in the next episode.